Seed oils, sugar, and flour. 2/3 of American calories. It's the perfect cocktail for insulin resistance and diabetes.
So ceramides are very resistant to oxidation. If you've got a lot of ceramides in a cell, it may just mean that that's kind of like what's left after everything else has been burnt up. In other words, like it's kind of like the charcoal, right? After a forest fire. It didn't cause the forest fire, but it's it's just what's left.
Ceramides, a family of waxy molecules found in high concentrations within the cell membrane of eukaryotic cells. They make up the supporting structure of a cell and conduct cellular signaling.
We've been looking at it inside out. They don't take into account just the basic biochemistry. If you're not paying attention to the fact that everybody is smoking and you're looking for a cause of cancer and asthma, you're going to be coming up with all kinds of wild, crazy theories that don't really get to the root of the problem and don't help you fix it. And that's why when you take away saturated fat, it doesn't help anybody's anything, because saturated fat was never the problem. Yes, you can get insulin resistance faster when you combine seed oils with sugar and carb. The second fastest way, though, if you had to pick public enemy number one, that's why I picked the seed oils. My theory on how you draw the connection between seed oils in the body fat and becoming insulin resistant and pre-diabetic is as follows. Your mitochondria are forced to burn PUFA. It shuts down ATP production within minutes. They've done studies.
ATP, organic compound that provides energy for living cells, for muscle contraction, nerve impulse, condensate dissolution, chemical synthesis.
Isolated liver cells, and they just feed them with physiologic amounts of different fatty acids. There was a fluorescent ATP, and if you created more cellular energy, you had more ATP, and the ATP was tagged with the phosphate was tagged in such a way that it would fluoresce, it would brighten up under the microscope. And so when the cell was producing more ATP, it was brighter. Just saturated fat, it stays at baseline 100%. Monounsaturated fat, interestingly, went up. And there's reasons for that are also hypothetical, but to me, they make sense. There's no mystery. Then when you added the most common PUFAs in soy oil, linoleic acid, that brought within something like 30 minutes, it brought the energy production down to 40% of what it had been. And when you added the omega-3, that's most common in canola oil, that brought energy production down to like 10 to 20% within 30 minutes. That was when the experiment stopped. Now, that would kill a cell if you had to shut off energy production by that much. So what happens is that the PUFAs, they literally start blowing apart because, as I mentioned, they are unstable. They react with oxygen. And you get so much happening in the mitochondria. It has these fuses that we call uncoupling proteins. So it's like a circuit breaker in your house. When there's too much energy happening, it just shuts down the mitochondria. And that's the mechanism by which these lights dimmed in the cells. The cell does it on purpose. And it can happen even with less pure amounts of omega-6 and omega-3 once you just get enough of these cascades going. So you can imagine if that starts to happen in a cell, because your body fat is so full of stuff, or you just had a huge meal of something deep fried, like chicken fried steak, that would be pretty low carb, except for the crust, but it'd be pretty high in PUFA. If you had that and your cells stopped producing energy from fat, what else are they going to use for energy? Well, there's all kinds of backup fuels. And one of the biggest ones, one of the most reliable, is always in our blood, because it's always in our bloodstream, is sugar, glucose. And this is how you create a cellular need for glucose that exceeds the normal physiologic tolerances that our whole bodies are designed for. We can't carry enough glucose in our bloodstream for every cell in our body to be highly glucose dependent. So what does that sound like? What's the solution to that? You raise the blood sugar. And to do that, you have to become, insulin resistant. And that's what happens. Your brain says to your liver, I need you to make more sugar stat right now. Start pumping out sugar. And so The liver does that by gluconeogenesis primarily. That's what the studies show, meaning it starts converting your protein into sugar. So that's the origin of diabetes, from seed oils alone.
Gluconeogenesis, a metabolic pathway resulting in generation of glucose from non-carbohydrate carbon substrates.
But we're not it's not seed oils alone. They have a lot of help from refined flours and sugars. There was another horrifying statistic I saw not a couple of years ago that showed that 2/3 of the average American's calories come from seed oils, refined sugars, and refined flours. 2/3. That leaves 1/3 for any kind of nutrition.
Seed oils, sugar, and flour. 2/3 of American calories. It's the perfect cocktail for insulin resistance and diabetes. Ceramides are very resistant to oxidation. If a cell has a lot of ceramides, maybe what is left after the oxidation process, like charcoal left in a forest after a fire. It did not cause the fire or the oxidation. Ceramides, a family of waxy molecules found in high concentrations within the cell membrane of eukaryotic cells. They make up the supporting structure of a cell and conduct cellular signaling. Ceramides are very resistant to oxidation, often looked at from the inside out. It's like you consider smoking. If you look for a cause, but you don't consider the cigarette smoking as a culprit, you'll have crazy theories. Seed oils and sugar combined is the fastest way to insulin resistance. However, the second fastest way, says Dr. Shanahan, is seed oils. It's my public enemy number one because they are so prolific. Here is my theory on how to get from seed oil in body fat to becoming insulin resistant and pre-diabetic. When the mitochondria are forced to burn PUFA, polyunsaturated fatty acids, it shuts down ATP production in minutes. ATP, organic compound that provides energy for living cells, for muscle contraction, nerve impulse, condensate dissolution, chemical synthesis. Studies on isolated liver cells feeding different fatty acids. Results, the effect on ATP functioning. Saturated fat, the ATP continues to function at 100%. Monounsaturated fat, the functioning actually went up. Linoleic acid, the functioning went down to 40% of normal. And omega-3s from canola oil, the functioning went down to 20% of normal. That would simply kill a regular cell. What happens is the PUFAs start blowing apart. They are unstable because of their double bonds. They react to oxygen. The mitochondria's uncoupling proteins shut down. That is why ATP functioning dropped. This can happen with less pure amounts of omega-6 and omega-3. Once you get enough of these cascades going, because the body fat is so full of stuff, for example, you just had a meal high in PUFA. If you had the situation and your cells stopped producing energy from fat, what to use for fuel? Well, one of the biggest alternatives is blood glucose. It creates a cellular need for glucose that exceeds our body's tolerance level. So the blood sugar is raised, which requires insulin resistance. The liver quickly makes more glucose via gluconeogenesis and converts protein into sugar. This is the origin of diabetes from seed oils alone. Gluconeogenesis, a metabolic pathway resulting in generation of glucose from non-carbohydrate carbon substrates. Dr. Shanahan concludes, generally, it's not seed oils alone that are the problem. They have a lot of help from refined flours and sugars. 2/3 of an average American's calories come from seed oils, sugar, and refined flour. That only leaves 1/3 for nutrition. annotated and summarized, easy to share with loved ones. The description below the title for this video has these summary points.